What is up, guys? It's your boy Rick. We've disabled Telesto for that reason, Kackis, and today we are going to be discussing Trials of Osiris. It's back for the first time in Season of the Lost, and it has been completely overhauled within its reward structure, matchmaking system, etc. And here's the thing, guys. Statistically, this overhaul was an overwhelming success. Less than a day in, this weekend was the most populated Trials of Osiris weekend in Destiny 2 history. In fact, this weekend has the most matches played out of any Trials of Osiris weekend. That is including Destiny 1 and Trials of the 9. So this is absolutely insane. So clearly, Bungie did a great job with this overhaul, and the community reaction has been overwhelmingly positive. That's not to say there's been no complaints, and we'll touch on them, but still more positive than negative. However, it's interesting now to take a step back and a wider look at the journey of Trials of Osiris, because Trials of Osiris didn't exist when Destiny 2 first started. It was originally Trials of the 9. And this was very popular in terms of, the player base, and that's why you'll see this weekend is breaking into the top 20 in terms of all-time trials, but the top Trials of the 9 weekends are still ahead of it. But that's just because way more players played Destiny 2 when it first came out, right? Vanilla Destiny 2 was incredibly popular, but it also fell off in its population incredibly fast due to all the problems it had, static perks, not random rolls, all that stuff. But eventually, Trials of the 9 would go away, and then for a long time we didn't have any sort of Trials activity until March 2020 with Season of the Worthy, Trials of Osiris would return. And this is where infamously a Bungie dev in the Vidoc said, "We didn't want Trials to be half-baked," but the community soon found out you couldn't have baked this thing any less. There was so many problems with original Trials. Remember, there wasn't even adept weapons. Those were added later, so there really wasn't a huge incentive to actually go flawless, and that's why when Trials first came back, we had the whole issue with token farming. Hardcore sweaty players would just farm 3 wins and reset over and over and over again to farm tokens as fast as possible, because turning in Trials tokens was really the only reasonable way to farm the loot fast. Like, it was just a disaster. Remember also, it didn't even have the weekly bounties. That was introduced later, where you could have people, jump off the edge. Infamously, the second most Trials populated weekend was when the 3-win reward was the Igneous Hammer. So you had that weekly bounty where it would just count match completion, so you'd have people just jump off the edge over and over again until they got that weapon, right? But that was the most casual friendly thing Trials had, and it didn't even have it originally. So Bungie was off to the wrong foot, like you couldn't believe, with Trials of Osiris. And so absolutely they should be being praised for fixing a lot of these issues with this most recent update. But holy crap, we should have never, launched Trials in the state that it was in. But with all that being said, it got overhauled, so let's talk about the main features of this overhaul, both the positives and the negatives. So firstly, the matchmaking. Right now, it's going to allow you to just normally matchmake into Trials like you're matchmaking into a normal Crucible game. So if you don't have a full team, you can still go into Trials. So the negatives of this, and this is something that is one of the main complaints that's coming out from this weekend, is that if you are a solo player, there's no freelance playlist, right? There's no playlist for just solo people. You have to matchmake into normal Trials, and often what it'll do is it will put you on a team with obviously either a duo or 2 other solos, but then it'll often match you against a full team. And so you're already kind of up against it when it comes to solo queuing in Trials. You can't communicate with your teammates often and stuff like that. And so then also having to likely match a full team of players who is going to be communicating, you are really unlikely to win that match, and even if you do, you're gonna have to win, 6 more matches to go flawless. Now, with that being said, I've already seen several Twitter posts about people who managed to do just that, went flawless only solo queuing. So it is possible, but again, the fact that it often does match you against full teams is the issue here. Not to mention, I've also seen too many times, and the game coming up in the gameplay is going to show this, if you do match 3 solos or duo and a solo, one of the solos will get frustrated and leave. And literally leave the other 2 of his teammates to fend for themselves. Like, of course they're going to lose that game. Now, apparently there is some bigger quitting penalties for Trials than normal, but still, that's really unfortunate to see, and you see it a lot. However, I would say, looking at the positives of this system, firstly, you have the entire population in one place. If you added a freelance playlist, it would split the population. And one of the best parts about the Overhauled Trials is that so many people are playing it. And that's making it so that you're getting reasonable matches with reasonable players. Even if you aren't the highest skilled player, before, no one other than the top skilled players and cheaters and recubs were playing Trials. Like, you had no chance. Now, you do have a reasonable chance to win some games, get some loot. So having everyone in one playlist and having that population be massive is definitely a big positive. Another big positive, and this is something I think people are forgetting, before, solos and duos wouldn't be able to play Trials at all. So you have solo players complaining about having hard matches, you'd be having 0 matches and be getting 0 loot before. But of course, I can see both sides, and Bungie does plan to introduce a freelance playlist for at least one of the weekends in kind of a Trials Labs situation to test things out. So I'm really interested to see the results, and if there can be a sustained large population in the normal playlist and in the freelance playlist, it all might work out for the better. But moving on from there, you have from the complete opposite end of the spectrum, the hardcore players. A lot of them are complaining that Trials is too easy now, and going flawless is just not what it used to be. This one, I gotta be honest, this is a weird one, because you still have to win 7 games in a row to get flawless. That process has not been changed whatsoever. So why would it be any easier? Well, it's easier because you're getting easier matches, at least according to these people. And to be honest, from my experience as well, the competition isn't quite as hardcore as it used to be. But that's mostly because normal people are playing Trials again. Back in the day, who played Trials, right? You would have 1/10 of the population that you have right now. The only people that would actually be braving that playlist were sweatlords, recovs, and cheaters. Like, maybe that's a little bit extreme to say, but I think there's some truth to it, right? When you had such a small population before, when the incentives and the loot just wasn't there, the only people playing were the hardest of the core that played every single weekend. Like, of course, it's gonna feel easier now when you have normal human beings, in the playlist. But that easier feeling is going to apply, frankly, to everyone, even if you're a bad, low-skilled player, whereas you had 0 chance of even ever winning a round before. Now, because there's more low-skilled players actually playing Trials, you could match another team of low-skilled players and, steal a game, steal a victory. And again, because it's about rounds won instead of just pure wins, all you need to do is steal a couple of rounds every single game. If you win 1 round, you're making progress towards pinnacle rewards, towards increasing your reputation to get Trials engrams and all that stuff. And especially now, if you do get just 1 Trials engram, you're already way ahead of where you were in normal Trials most of the time, because you can focus that engram. You can say, I want a Reed's Regret, or I want an Igneous Hammer, or I want, the shotgun, etc. You can go after a certain piece of loot. Yes, it's actually going to be pretty expensive resource-wise, but this also completely eliminates one of the main problems of Trials, was that you would just have trash weekends, right? Like I said before, the weekend when the Igneous Hammer was a 3-win reward for the first time, that was such a meta weapon, that was the second most populated Trials weekend of all time. Like, that was another great weekend. And that was when we didn't have anti-cheat and recovs weren't banned. And you had people saying, wow, this feels great. Did Bungie do something with cheaters? I actually saw people tweet out, like, did we get an anti-cheat behind the scenes? Just because there was so many more people playing, you had a less likelihood of matching those cheaters. Whereas when the player base was so small, it felt like you were matching them every other game. Well, that's because, again, like, the only people playing were the cheaters for a lot of weekends. But because, again, you can focus those engrams, those weekends when you just had trash loot, like you'd have some weekends where it was like, yeah, Bond on 3 wins, Chess Piece on 5 wins, you know, Fusion Rifle on 7 wins, and then an Adept Fusion, and people just wouldn't care. So getting rid of that system and saying, hey, every weekend is viable because you can go after the exact loot you want every weekend. That is absolutely the way to go. However, there is kind of one concern about that system that I've seen being voiced, and that is, well, you're gonna get exactly what you want a few weekends in. Like if you are grinding the Trials playlist, you're going to get the God Roll Reed's Regret, which is the only new weapon in the loot pool. You're gonna get, you know, the other God Rolls you want to get pretty easily. And then are you going to be incentivized to come back into that playlist? Of course, potentially you are for flawless rewards, but, you know, if you're just an average player who doesn't want to go flawless, doesn't have to deal with that stress, like, you just might get the normal God rolls and be done with the playlist. And so the downside of this system is, like, will we see a dramatic decrease in the player base over the coming weeks when people just get the loot they want and move on? And that's another very interesting question. We might, but I would say that there's always going to be people funneling in, and I feel like this is an overwhelmingly more positive system. You want people to quit the playlist because they've got what they want and they're happy and they're satisfied, not because they're furious that they couldn't get what they wanted in the first place, right? You rather people be leaving with a positive note, and then when you do introduce new Trials loot with a new season, those people will come back, rather than, you know, in the past you had people who left with a sour note. They were dissatisfied, they were annoyed, they couldn't get what they want, and then those people aren't going to come back just because you add a new weapon. They're done with the playlist altogether. So I feel like overall, even though you might see the playlist numbers drop in terms of population, the population leaving is going to be satisfied, and they're going to be way more likely to come back at a later date. But guys, at the end of the day, when we take a look at the Trials Overhaul and see not only the overwhelming positivity, but also the incredible numbers and engagement this activity is getting this weekend, the takeaway has got to be the fact that when Bungie invests the resources into a PvP activity and does right by that PvP activity, it can be really beneficial for the game. For the past several years, PvP has really been put on the back burner. In fact, we haven't even gotten new maps. We're not getting new maps until 2022. The last time we got new maps, I think, was with Shadow Keep. So finally, when Bungie focuses on a PvP activity and actually flushes it out and does things right, wow, we have a huge amount of engagement. We have an energized PvP community, and we're seeing that just in terms of numbers. So now I think you have to take a step back and say, okay, obviously PvE is still going to be invested greatly in, and when you change things like introduce new mods, introduce new exotics, new weapons, etc., even if you're acquiring them through PvE methods, they affect PvP greatly as well. But like, really, it is time, I think, for Bungie to say, okay, we finally did Trials right, and the community response was insane. So now we need to look at normal Crucible. Now we need to look at a proper competitive ranked mode. Now, heck, we need to look at Gambit again, right? So these are things that are worth investing in. Bungie could have left Trials and used their resources to make more PvE activities, right? But would the engagement have been as high as it is now? I don't necessarily think so. So that's another really important thing that Bungie needs to now consider. Guys, that is it for the video. I hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickKackis. That is linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.